At Christmas, her family hid an affair and stole child support until the truth exploded, so she sued them and won publicly. Eleanor Washington was making chocolate chip pancakes for her son, Jacob, in the kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the window. The sweet aroma of pancakes filled the small apartment, and soon the sound of an 8-year-old boy's footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Good morning, Mama." Jacob's voice was cheerful despite his sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Jay." Eleanor smiled as she placed a perfectly round pancake in front of her son. "Do your best at school today." Jacob nodded innocently and poured syrup over his pancakes. Eleanor gently stroked her son's black hair and said, "We are going to visit Grandma and Grandpa's house on Sunday." For a moment, tension flashed across her smile. 3 years ago, Eleanor had divorced her husband Michael, citing irreconcilable differences. That was the official explanation, but the truth was more complicated. After the divorce, she moved with her son to an apartment near the upscale neighborhood in the Boston suburbs where her parents, Robert and Martha, lived. Her reason was that she needed family support. But Eleanor still did not understand what that support actually meant. Eleanor's bakery, Sweet Traditions, had been open for 2 years and was finally beginning to stabilize financially. Her baked goods, which honored traditional American recipes while adding her own unique touches, were gaining popularity locally. However, at the weekly Sunday lunches at her parents' home, her business was rarely a topic of conversation. "Mama, is Dad coming today?" Jacob suddenly asked the question caused a small pang in Eleanor's heart. "No, Dad will not be coming today. He is busy," Eleanor answered, maintaining her composure. After the divorce, Michael had maintained a close relationship with her family, especially with her sister Victoria, whom he frequently contacted as a business partner. However, he often failed to pay the promised child support for his son, Jacob. Sunday afternoon, Eleanor headed to her parents' house with a homemade apple pie. The large white house on Maple Street maintained its dignity, unchanged over the years. Opening the gate and walking through the well-maintained garden, she noticed a Christmas wreath already adorning the front door. The door opened, and Eleanor's mother, Martha, appeared. "Oh, Eleanor, another homemade pie. You should have bought one at the store." Martha's first words began, as usual, with criticism. "Victoria has already arrived. She is always punctual." Entering the house, Eleanor found her father, Robert, and sister, Victoria, chatting in the living room. Victoria was stylishly dressed in designer clothes with a perfect blonde hairstyle. "Ellie, you finally made it." Victoria waved casually. "Jacob, give your aunt a hug." Jacob approached Victoria with some hesitation. She formally embraced him and quickly let go. "Hey, did you hear? Michael and I are starting a new project together. He really has an amazing business sense." Eleanor maintained her smile as she placed the apple pie on the dining table. "That is wonderful," she replied flatly. At lunch, the conversation always centered on Victoria's success stories, Robert's investment talks, and Martha's social event planning. When Eleanor began to speak about her bakery's new menu items, the topic quickly changed. "By the way, what are the plans for Christmas?" Martha asked. "This year, we can all spend it together." "I have invited Michael as a special guest." Eleanor quietly drew in her breath. "Michael, but why? He is part of this family." "Eleanor," Robert said in a stern voice, "just because you chose divorce does not mean we need to cut ties with Michael." Eleanor remembered that she had never asked them to do so, but she nodded silently. Her phone rang with an incoming message. It was from a detective she had hired 6 months ago. Eleanor quietly returned her smartphone to her bag and forced a smile. On Christmas Eve morning, Eleanor woke up early to bake a special cake. The red and white cake, adorned with strawberries and raspberries, was a recipe her mother had once treasured and called the family bond. Her mother had baked this cake as a Christmas tradition for years, but had stopped after Eleanor's divorce, saying, "Traditions are not worth keeping." "Mama, do you think Santa will come soon?" Jacob asked, gazing at the small presents placed under the Christmas tree. He was at the age where he was beginning to doubt Santa Claus's existence, but he had not yet lost his belief in Christmas magic. "Of course you have been such a good boy," Eleanor answered, patting her son's head. She had hidden a new bicycle for Jacob. It was an expensive purchase, but she would spare no sacrifice for her son's smile. By afternoon, Eleanor had carefully packed the homemade cake in a box, and Jacob held handmade cards for his grandparents. As they left the apartment, snow had begun to fall quietly. "Christmas snow, Jay. It is something very special," Eleanor said, looking up at the sky. Her face glowed beautifully as she smiled at her son, but in the depths of her eyes burned a quiet flame of determination. In the inner pocket of her coat was a red envelope containing a copy of the report she had received from the detective. Arriving at Robert and Martha's house, several luxury cars were already parked outside. Eleanor took a deep breath to give herself courage. "Do not forget to smile, Jacob. Today is a special day for everyone." Victoria opened the door. She was wearing a black velvet dress with a diamond pendant gleaming at her neck. "You finally arrived. Everyone is waiting." Victoria gave a formal kiss on Eleanor's cheek. "Oh, a homemade cake. Mother already bought an expensive dessert from Whole Foods." "I wanted to honor tradition," Eleanor replied quietly. As she entered the living room, she saw Michael. 3 years after the divorce, he looked more refined and successful. He wore an expensive suit with gold cufflinks glinting in the light. "Ellie? Glad you could make it." Michael smiled, but his gaze quickly shifted to Jacob. "How are you doing? Keeping well?" Jacob approached his father with some nervousness. "Dad, what do you want for a Christmas present? I made a list." Michael lightly patted his son's head, but his eyes were already searching for Victoria. "Sure, show me later," he said as he took a champagne glass and walked toward Victoria on the other side of the room. Eleanor's heart ached seeing her son's hurt expression, but she quickly brightened her voice. "Jacob, let us go say hello to Grandpa." At dinner, an extravagant roast beef and Christmas ham were served, and the table setting was perfect. Eleanor sat next to her mother, and Jacob was seated opposite next to his father. However, Michael barely looked at his son, engrossed in conversation with Victoria. "Everyone, we have something special to celebrate this year," Robert said, raising his glass. "Victoria and Michael's new business venture has been a great success. Their real estate investment company has reportedly made record profits this year." Everyone around the table applauded and offered congratulations. Eleanor did not miss the meaningful glances exchanged between Michael and Victoria. Her hand unconsciously touched the red envelope in her coat pocket. "Eleanor, how is your little bakery?" Martha asked abruptly. Her voice always contained a hint of sarcasm. "Is it still breaking even?" "Yes, Mother. Actually, I am planning to open a second location next year," Eleanor answered in a calm voice. "Well, that is nice." Martha clearly lost interest and quickly changed the subject. "Victoria, tell us about your ski vacation plans in Aspen." As Eleanor cut the cake, she saw Michael touch Victoria's hand under the table. In that moment, something quietly solidified her resolve. Eleanor confirmed that the red envelope was still in her coat pocket. "By the way, Jacob, how are your grades at school?" Robert showed interest in his grandson for the first time. Jacob's face lit up. "My teacher said, I am the best in math in the class, and I am going to play a shepherd in the Christmas pageant." "That is nice." Martha smiled, but her eyes lacked warmth. "But your cousin Brian has already won the state chess championship." Eleanor saw her son's shoulders droop slightly. "Jacob has been doing excellently. His teacher says he has special talent," she said in a gentle but firm voice. Michael was looking at his phone and said nothing about his son's achievements. Instead, he whispered something to Victoria, and they both laughed quietly. When dessert time came, Eleanor's cake was served. "Well, Eleanor, this is not my mother's traditional recipe," Martha said as she took a slice. "You changed something." "I added a little twist." "To make it more fragrant," Eleanor replied. "Traditions should be kept as traditions," Martha said, clearly displeased, "especially family traditions." Eleanor felt the irony, but smiled quietly. "Yes, family traditions should be treasured, especially when family members cherish and respect each other." A moment of silence fell over the table. Michael and Victoria exchanged anxious glances. "Well, it is time to exchange presents." Martha quickly changed the subject and stood up. "Let us move to the living room." Under the Christmas tree, colorful presents were piled high. Eleanor quietly took a seat and had her son sit beside her. Her face was serene, but her heart was pounding. "Let us start with special presents," Martha said, handing a lavishly wrapped box to Victoria. "For our special daughter." Victoria opened the box and took out a luxury brand diamond bracelet. "Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Dad." "Mom," she rushed to her parents, giving them hugs and grateful kisses. Next, Michael received a similarly expensive watch. "You have always been special to us," Martha smiled as she said it. Eleanor frowned at those words. It was clearly unnatural for her ex-husband to be special to her parents. When it was Jacob's turn, he was excited with anticipation. Martha handed him a small package. "Here, from Grandma." Jacob eagerly opened the package and pulled out a set of worn toy cars. They were so old that they could have been sold in an antique shop, the same ones Eleanor had as a child. "Thank you, Grandma," Jacob said politely. Despite his obvious disappointment, finally Martha turned to Eleanor. In her hand was a red envelope. "And, Eleanor, this is your present." Eleanor quietly accepted the envelope. It was strangely similar to the red envelope she herself carried. She slowly opened it and took out the card inside. There was only one line written on it. "You no longer have a place in this family." A heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor quietly closed the card and said in a calm voice without looking at anyone, "I understand." Martha gave a cold smile and raised her champagne glass. "Presents are only for real family." Her voice had a triumphant ring to it. Victoria stood next to her mother and raised her glass as well. "Being a single mother is such a shame," she said in a light tone, but her words cut through Eleanor's heart like a sharp blade. Jacob did not fully understand the situation, but he sensed that his mother had been told something terrible. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he called out in a trembling voice, "Mama." Eleanor gently placed her hand on her son's shoulder and whispered, "It is okay, Jay." Her voice was surprisingly calm. She slowly stood up and stepped into the center of the room. "Everyone, I have a gift for you too." Eleanor took out her own red envelope from her coat pocket. It was almost the same color and size as the one Martha had given her. "This is the real gift I received from people I thought were my family." She placed the envelope on the table. Michael shifted uncomfortably and the color drained from Victoria's face. "Eleanor, what are you trying to do?" Robert's voice mixed anger and anxiety. "I am just giving you the truth, Dad," Eleanor replied quietly. "For 3 years I have always wondered, why did my marriage suddenly collapse? Why could my husband who abandoned me still be part of this family?" Michael stood up and said in a low voice, "Eleanor, stop." But Eleanor ignored him. "And why does not my son's child support reach me? Is Michael not paying or—" She looked at her parents. "Is the money being stopped somewhere?" Martha stood up and said, "This is inappropriate talk for this occasion." Her voice was sharp and commanding, especially in front of the child. "You are right, Mother. It might be inappropriate in front of a child." Eleanor turned to look at her son. Jacob was watching his mother with a confused and frightened expression. Eleanor smiled at him and said, "Jay, could you wait outside for a bit? It would be helpful if you could bring my coat." Jacob hesitated but followed his mother's words. After he left the room, Eleanor turned back to her family. 6 months ago, I hired a detective. I asked him just one thing. What was the real reason for my divorce? Eleanor's voice was quiet but powerful. And he did a very thorough investigation. Victoria suddenly interrupted. "This is ridiculous. We have things to do. Michael, let us go." "Where are you going, Victoria?" Eleanor asked calmly. "To Michael's penthouse for your Christmas Eve night together." Silence fell over the room again. Michael and Victoria stood frozen. "Yes, I know," Eleanor continued, "that Michael and Victoria have been having an affair for 4 years. That means since before I was still married to him." "Lies!" Victoria screamed. "You do not have any proof." Eleanor pointed to the red envelope. "All the evidence is in there. Hotel records, private jet reservations, photos of the two of you together. And the real reason Michael suddenly asked for a divorce." Martha quickly reached for the envelope, but Eleanor was faster, taking the envelope and stepping back. "Not yet. Mother, there is more in the envelope." Eleanor's eyes glinted sharply. "For example, records showing that Michael has been properly paying the court-ordered child support, but the reason why that money never reached my account." Robert suddenly stood up and approached Eleanor. "Eleanor, stop this now. You do not understand anything." "No, Dad. I understand everything." Eleanor looked directly into her father's eyes. Michael gave you the child support and you claimed you would manage it for Eleanor, but in reality, you were using that money for yourselves." "That is not true," Martha cried out. "We were investing that money for you." "For me?" Eleanor gave a bitter smile. "How? For Victoria's new sports car? For your own luxury cruise vacations?" The atmosphere in the room grew more tense. Eleanor continued. "The envelope contains one more piece of evidence. A recording of your family meeting discussing me, particularly how to push me out of the company and damage the reputation of my bakery. That is not—" Robert was at a loss for words. Eleanor slowly placed the envelope back on the table. "This is my real Christmas present to you. The truth. What do you want?" Michael finally spoke money. Eleanor sadly shook her head. "No, Michael. I have already gotten what I wanted. I was not wrong. All of you betrayed me and Jacob." Jacob returned with the coat. He noticed the heavy atmosphere in the room and looked anxiously at his mother. "Let us go, Jay." Eleanor smiled at her son and put her arm around his shoulders. "We are each other's only real family." As they headed toward the door, Eleanor turned back. "Read the contents of that envelope carefully and expect to hear from my lawyer. Misappropriation of child support is a crime." Martha stepped forward. "Eleanor, we are your parents. Do you think you can manage without us?" "Mother, I have been managing on my own all along," Eleanor answered quietly. "Blood ties do not always make a true family, and people without blood ties can become true family." As Eleanor and Jacob left the house, her son squeezed her hand tightly. "Mama, do not Grandpa and Grandma love us anymore?" Eleanor knelt in front of her son and looked straight into his eyes. "Love comes in many forms, Jay, but real love respects and cherishes others. We will create a new family, just us." As they got into the car and pulled out of the driveway, shouting began to be heard from inside the house. Michael's angry voice, Victoria's sobbing, and Robert and Martha arguing broke the quiet of the night. Eleanor glanced back just once through the rearview mirror. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release. She smiled at Jacob and whispered, "A new beginning." The snow began to fall more heavily, covering their car tracks. Tonight, Eleanor had become truly free for the first time. An uncertain future lay ahead of her, but at least it was a future shaped by her own choices. The gentle melody of White Christmas played on the car radio. Eleanor began to sing softly, and after a while, Jacob joined in. Their voices resonated warmly inside the car. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the window of Eleanor's apartment gently illuminated her face. For a moment, she thought, last night's events might have been a nightmare, but the copy of the red envelope on the table reminded her that everything had been real. Her smartphone had been ringing non-stop since morning. Calls and messages from her parents, Victoria and Michael, arrived continuously, but Eleanor did not respond to any of them. Instead, her first action was to call her lawyer, Susan Chen. "Merry Christmas!" Susan's voice sounded warm over the phone. She was Eleanor's friend since college days and specialized in family law. "Susan, I have a request," Eleanor said quietly. "Last night, I finally used the evidence." "Your family must have been surprised," Susan said a bit hesitantly. "Yes, and now they are desperately trying to contact me," Eleanor said, looking at her smartphone screen. "But I do not intend to speak with them directly anymore. I want all communication to go through you, understood? Can you send all the evidence documents to my office?" Susan switched to a professional tone. "The child support issue is particularly serious. Misappropriation could become a criminal case. Is that what you want?" Eleanor thought for a moment and replied, "All I want is justice. The money that should be paid to Jacob belongs to him." After hanging up, Eleanor made hot chocolate in the kitchen and headed to her son's room, who was still asleep. Jacob was sleeping peacefully, hugging a stuffed animal. His small face still showed traces of last night's confusion. Eleanor gently kissed his forehead to wake him up. "Good morning, champion. Merry Christmas." Jacob slowly opened his eyes and whispered, "Mama, did Santa come?" "Of course." Eleanor smiled. "Santa always brings presents to good children." Still in their pajamas, they moved to the small living room and began opening presents under the Christmas tree. The light in Jacob's face when he discovered the new bicycle was the best Christmas gift for Eleanor. By afternoon, employees from Eleanor's bakery visited one after another, bringing handmade Christmas presents. They surrounded Eleanor and Jacob, filling the small apartment with laughter and songs. Eleanor felt deep gratitude for their presence. This was the family she had chosen. At dusk, there was a call from Susan. "Eleanor, there is already movement. Michael's lawyer contacted me. They seem to want a swift resolution." "What does that mean?" Eleanor asked, looking at the snowy landscape outside the window. "Michael has agreed to pay all unpaid child support plus an increase in future support, and he is also proposing compensation for emotional damages to you." Susan's voice contained surprise. "They seem extremely afraid of this becoming public." Eleanor gave a dry smile. "I am sure they are. Michael's reputation is the lifeblood of his business. If it became known that he cheated on his wife and then embezzled his child support money—" "I have also heard from your parents," Susan said carefully. "They want to see you." "No, not yet," Eleanor said firmly. "Legal resolution first. Emotions later." A few days later, a small local news article was published. Prominent businessman Michael Washington agrees to pay substantial settlement to ex-wife. On the surface, it appeared to be a normal adjustment of post-divorce property division, but rumors spread rapidly in the local community. A week later, Eleanor's bakery was busier than usual. Unexpectedly, many customers were visiting to support her. "I am impressed by your strength," an elderly female customer said. "I had a similar experience, but I did not have the courage to stand up like you did." Eleanor was deeply moved by those words. She realized that her family's shame was actually an experience many people could relate to. A month later, the court ordered Michael to pay all unpaid child support and significantly increase future payments. Furthermore, Robert and Martha were ordered to return the funds they had improperly managed and pay a fine. Eleanor's decision came with costs: complete severance from her former family and becoming the subject of local gossip. But she was prepared to accept that. As spring approached, Eleanor was preparing for the opening of her second bakery location. Investing part of the funds from the legal settlement, her business was steadily growing. While kneading bread dough, Eleanor turned at the sound of the doorbell ringing. There stood Victoria. Unlike her previous flashy style, she was dressed simply with minimal makeup. "Eleanor," Victoria said hesitantly, "can we talk?" After thinking briefly, Eleanor replied shortly, "In the back of the store." The two moved to a small office space. "I broke up with Michael," Victoria began. "He was different from the person I imagined." Eleanor said nothing, just staring at her sister. "I came to apologize to you," Victoria continued in a trembling voice. I do not think I truly understood what I was doing for 4 years." Eleanor's voice was calm, but anger remained in her eyes. "I will not make excuses," Victoria bowed her head. "I just, if possible, wanted to start over." Eleanor was silent for a while. "I might be able to forgive, but I will never forget, Victoria," she finally said, "and it will take time to rebuild trust." "I understand." Victoria nodded slightly. "I will wait." That evening, Eleanor picked up Jacob from school. Her son seemed brighter and more confident than before. "Mama, I got a perfect score on my math test today," Jacob said proudly. "That is wonderful." Eleanor hugged her son. "We will have a special dinner tonight. What would you like to eat?" "Pizza," Jacob answered without hesitation. Eleanor laughed. "Pizza it is, a perfect choice." As they walked hand in hand, Jacob suddenly asked, "Mama, do not Grandpa and Grandma love us anymore?" Eleanor stopped and looked into her son's eyes. "Jay, love is complicated. Grandpa and Grandma do love you, but sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes it is hard for them to admit those mistakes. But are we still family?" Jacob's eyes showed anxiety. Of course, Eleanor gently touched her son's cheek. "Family is not just about blood ties. It is about people who cherish and support each other. And we have many such people, do not we?" Jacob nodded with a smile. "Yeah, everyone at the bakery, my friends, my teacher." "That is right," Eleanor smiled. "We are creating our own family. And it is growing a little bit every day." As the evening sky turned red, mother and son headed home, their shadows stretching in the fading light. Christmas. 1 year later. Eleanor's new house was in a quiet residential neighborhood near Boston. With the success of her second bakery location, she was now recognized as a reputable small business owner locally. Through the window against the snowy landscape, 9-year-old Jacob was arranging presents under the Christmas tree. "Mama, what time is everyone coming?" Jacob asked in an excited voice. 6 o'clock. We still have plenty of time to prepare, Eleanor answered from the kitchen where the aroma of freshly baked gingerbread wafted through the air. Tonight was a special night. Eleanor's chosen family, her bakery employees, Jacob's schoolteacher, and lawyer Susan with her family were invited for Christmas dinner. They were the people who had continued to support Eleanor and Jacob throughout the year. Hearing the sound of mail in the mailbox, Eleanor went to the door. There was a letter with her parents' address from Maple Street. Eleanor stared at the letter for a while before slowly opening it. Dear Eleanor and Jacob, first, we sincerely apologize for our past mistakes. The letter was filled with apologies from her aging parents. While making excuses that they had been manipulated by Michael and Victoria, they acknowledged their own error in judgment. At the end of the letter was written, "Please give us a chance to spend time with our grandson." Eleanor sat by the window reading the letter over and over. Conflicting emotions were churning in her heart. She knew that while forgiveness was possible, returning to the same relationship as before was impossible. "Mama, what letter is that?" Jacob approached. "From Grandpa and Grandma," Eleanor answered honestly. "Would you like to see them?" Jacob thought for a while and replied, "Yes, I would like to, but I know they did bad things." Eleanor was surprised by her son's mature response. "That is right. People make mistakes, and forgiveness is important, but that does not mean forgetting everything. But forgiving makes you feel better too, right?" Jacob's words were surprisingly wise. Eleanor hugged her son and whispered, "Yes, you are really smart." Together, they took out a red envelope and began writing a reply. It was a letter proposing the rebuilding of relationships with new boundaries, rather than anger or resentment. Beginning with the title, "What is Family?" The letter detailed what Eleanor and Jacob had learned over the year, that blood ties are only part of it, and respect, honesty, and unconditional love are what truly form a family. At twilight, invited guests began to arrive, filling the house with laughter and warmth. Various dishes were arranged on the dining table, and people shared news about their lives. Everyone present was bound by genuine bonds, even without blood relations. Before dinner, Eleanor raised her glass and said, "Thank you to everyone who has supported us this year. You are the family we have chosen, and next year, our circle may grow even wider." In her eyes shone the strength of having overcome past pain and hope for the future. Outside the window, snow continued to fall quietly, announcing the arrival of a new season.